Hi, this is Zach from Worn&Wound. Today we're taking a look at the Fair Universal Barnato. Fair is a fairly new brand based out of England that is pursuing kind of an interesting niche in the kind of current watch market. They were kind of straddling the line between kind of classic watch designs and something a bit more fashionable, drawing on, I'd say the success of brands like Daniel Wellington, but also definitely looking at and listening to what people who are, kind of diehard watch fans, ourselves included, are really looking for. So clearly you can see in this watch here, there's a very strong vintage design aspect to this watch, and yet it has a kind of a fresh, modern feel to it. It's bright and colorful. It has some interesting things going on to it, so it doesn't feel just like a recreation piece, rather a watch that just kind of speaks to the mid-century watch aesthetic. This model here is called the Barnato. It is named after Diana Walker Barnato, who was a great female adventurer. All of Fair's watches kind of take into account this kind of spirit of adventure. The name Fair itself kind of taken from Wayfarer, Seafarer. So that is kind of just where they draw their inspiration from. I think in the watch, the kind of gentleman sport watch design here, you can see where that's coming from. Definitely pulls on the aesthetic of watches like a Rolex Explorer, Smith's Everest, things like that. It is a GMT. There are different watches in their line, not are all GMT. They have ones with sub-seconds, but the Barnato is a GMT powered by a Ronda 515.24 quartz movement. The watch costs 420 pounds, that's with VAT, so it's around $440 US without VAT, putting it on the high side for a quartz watch. But I think you'll find in the detailing and styling of this watch, it has a lot going on. So let's take a closer look. The case of the Fair Barnato definitely to me draws on some vintage classic watches, particularly that of the Rolex Oyster Perpetual watches, but it doesn't, it's not a copy of those. It just has some similar aesthetic cues. It's a very attractive design that comes in also at a very nice size, a kind of watch sizing that we definitely appreciate here. So it's 39.5 millimeters in diameter. That's a really nice modern kind of modest size. It's not too small, not too big. Under 40 I think is already small by modern standards, but it has enough width to it to I think have like a nice sporty presence on the wrist, which you'll see later. It's 45.8 millimeters lug to lug, so it's fairly short. Lug to lug also, in my opinion, ends up being more critical for the fit of a watch than the diameter even, because of how the lugs are going to sit on your wrist. So 45.8 is really, it's actually modest. It's going to fit a lot of wrists. And then it's a 11.25 millimeters tall, and that's to the top of this domed crystal. While we're on the domed crystal, I might as well start saying that this is actually a domed mineral crystal with a sapphire coating. So it's going to be scratch resistant, but it is not sapphire. I will say I was a little disappointed to find that it was mineral at this price point. I expected sapphire or for it to frankly have an acrylic crystal, because I think the aesthetic of acrylic would actually work very well with this watch. But yeah, so looking at the case design itself, it's a very classic case from the top. The profiles are standard, nice lugs, contouring edges. Everything's very cleanly brushed, and very attractive brushing. Has a nice wide bezel. Where it gets a little bit different, a little more interesting, is the profile on the sides. The profile is very simple and elegant, but the sides themselves have a very, very soft radius to them. And this is where it kind of has a Oyster Perpetual feel to me. If you've ever worn a date dress, you'll know what I'm talking about. So they have this very beautiful flowing curve to the side that gives everything a little bit of a softer look, a softer feel, kind of taking down the ruggedness a little bit, giving it a little bit more of that kind of, sporty, but like dressy sport, for the gentleman sport watch kind of feel. And I think it's very beautiful, especially on the wrist. It has a nice, just a pleasant elegantness to it, on top of being kind of a nice, stout watch. Looking at the crown on the right side, you have a very cool crown here. I've seen some people kind of comment that they didn't love this, but I happen to be quite fond of it. I think it's a cool detail, definitely something that they're going to have as a signature. So the shape of it, it's a truncating kind of cone a little bit. So rather than being a straight cylinder, it's actually the diameter of the crown is getting smaller as it goes out. It's about 6 millimeters wide, about 3 millimeters tall, but 6 millimeters closest to the case, getting a little bit smaller coming out. That gives it a kind of an interesting look, but obviously the real standout feature here is that it has this golden kind of brassy color here. Nothing else on the case is gold, so that really makes it pop and stand out. Definitely a little bit of like a controversial detail because it's kind of unexpected, but I like it. I think it's interesting. You know, we see so many watches by so many brands that do nothing exciting. You know, they stay very safe. So this to me is like a fun little detail that gives the watch personality. Looking at it straight on, really beautiful detail work here. So you have the Fair logo there, which is a kind of a cross between an A and an arrow. And that is polished, but the surface under it has a nice matte sheen. So it's just a kind of a nicely executed little crown detail there. Flipping the watch over, you have a very simple case back, screwed down 4 screws. Simple art here, but it is nice looking. So you have Fair on a sort of compass shape. The dial of the Fair Barnato is definitely where it comes to life the most. It's a simple dial with a lot of flat printing on it, but just really nicely executed typefaces, a pleasant use of color, not overbearing use of color, just some subtle addition of color, and a couple of interesting textures. So the main surface is a sunburst light silver, which you can see behind these main indexes here. That gives it a nice sheen to it. It's not an overly aggressive sunburst. Like sometimes sunbursts can feel cheesy to me. This one is more of just like a light metallic sheen. And then the center of the dial actually has a flat printed matte gray on it, which is an interesting choice. I mean, I think like rather than do a different kind of texture, say with stamping, you know, they used a paint or an ink that's printed on there, and that has a very nice look to it. It gives it a bit of a nice modern touch to it. So there's a kind of a play going on here, a vintage feeling with kind of a crisper modern graphic sensibility, and I feel like that inner circle is part of that modern sensibility. And the color matching or play really is quite nice here with the light silver with then a light gray. So there's contrast in texture, but there's not a lot of contrast in tonality, and that just gives it a really kind of interesting effect. Looking at the primary index here, you have an hour index of large black Arabic numerals. They are in a sans serif typeface. It's a very nicely chosen typeface. It's it's clean and simple, but it's not a generic typeface. There's a little bit more personality to it. I particularly like the 6 and the 9, just how those are executed. It's very clear, very legible, well sized. You know, it's a very kind of big number watch, so easy to read at a glance. Looking around that, you then have the GMT 24-hour index presented in this kind of a pinkish red, maybe like kind of a sort of a coral color. Very attractive. I love the pop of red here. Once again, extremely easy to read with the GMT hand, so you do have the dual time, second time zone going on there. It's the red it's aggressive. It's a little bit in your face, but the balance of that color to the size of the black numerals, I think is well done. So you don't kind of get distracted by either, depending on which hand you want to look at. On the very outside, then you have a little railroad index in black, simple. That's for the minutes, seconds. Add some legibility. Frankly, with this watch, I found it so easy to read. You don't even need that much additional legibility. But it's there. It's well done. At intervals of 5, you have a little lume dot there. So, at night you have just a little added legibility from that. At 3, you have a date window, a circular date window with a very clean typeface on the date disc. I imagine that is custom. That doesn't look like some of the standard ones that we typically see. It's much more kind of a modern typeface. I like the execution here. Obviously, they had to deal with the date disc location not being exactly in line with where the numerals are going to be. So to alter that or to kind of compensate for that, they added the little line here. And you also have how the relationship of that little circle cutting into that circle. In the end, it balances out well with those other numerals, doesn't feel out of place. And obviously then you just have the addition of the date function. Looking at the hands now, for the hour and minute, you have blue steel kind of syringe hands. I don't think those are heat blue. They're a little bit too blue, so they're probably a chemical blue. But the blue is attractive. I think once again is an additional color. You have the red, the steel, yellow from the seconds, and then blue there. It's colorful, but it's like it's a logical grouping of colors. There's no kind of like out there or absurd color on this dial to kind of like overdo it. What's really nice about the design of these hands, though, is that the minute is bent down a little bit. It might be hard to see, but that just adds a little bit of extra dimensionality and texture. It's a detail I really like to see. It's something you would see more in vintage watches. You only see it here and there now. Young Hands is a brand that we see them do it often, but watches, kind of newer, kind of fashion-focused watches, it's not that common. So I think that's a really nice detail. Definitely shows that they're concerned with that level of detail, which, I just love to see. The GMT hand here, black, kind of a classic GMT style hand with just a triangle pointer. That is filled with red. That's a nice relationship. So you just see the red and the red together, and then the black kind of disappears. It doesn't truly disappear. Obviously, it stands out, but it has less of a presence than the blue or the yellow do. So, I think that works well. Obviously, also, there's no confusion between this handset and that handset. And then you have this fun yellow hand ticking around. The tip of that is the Fair A logo once again, but it is just also an arrow pointer, so it doesn't seem like aggressive branding, but you can associate the two together. It's a little skeletonized tip, which is nice, and that also bends down. Once again, with color, I really like the yellow hand here. It's not a super obnoxious yellow. It's more of kind of a milky yellow, a little bit matte, toned down. Looks really, really nice. On the wrist, the Barnato wears really nicely. I think this is actually a kind of a perfectly sized watch, at least for my wrist, 7-inch wrist here. It's small enough to not feel obnoxious, not feel like an oversized watch, but it's a little bit larger than, the classic kind of vintage sizes, which would be more 36 to 38. 39.5 here has really nice presence, but it's modest, it's subtle, it's still restrained, I think, and proportionally, it works really well with the dial and everything. There's no feel of wasted space here. It's all very well tuned and just well thought out. As I said before, I think as far as wearability goes, often lug to lug makes an even larger difference than the diameter. The diameter is more presence, but as far as how it fits, the lug to lug, if it spans over your wrist, that gets awkward and uncomfortable. 45.8 millimeters here is small and very comfortable. That's going to fit a lot of wrists, definitely wrists smaller than mine as well. And it just keeps the watch nicely, sitting nicely on top of the wrist. And just looking at this watch now, it's an extremely attractive watch. I've worn it a lot since, we've been lent it. And I think part of that is it's very comfortable. It's very light, which is also partially because of the quartz movement inside. But it's just a very nice looking watch. It's very appealing. It has style to it, a lot of style. It has a vintage feel to it, but it's something a little different, something a little new. And it's something that I personally find very aesthetically pleasing, something that really fits in with my own kind of personal style that I go for. I think we've seen a lot of these other kind of brands kind of pop up in this space. I've mentioned it before, but like Daniel Wellington, they went for kind of a preppy, kind of an obvious Rolex thing. Nothing really challenging there at all. This has color going on. It has a lot more going on with the typefaces. This is a lot more interesting. So to me, it's a much more engaging aesthetic. And then you also have some little, kind of more shocking details, if you will, not really shocking, but like a gold crown here, which just add to the personality. You have a lot of different strap options when you get the Barnato, 5 or 6, including like a Milanese, various colors of leather. This is obviously kind of a standard dark brown leather, but it's a very nice leather, definitely, higher quality than, sometimes you see. Has a nice grain to it. It's padded, very nicely executed edges, stitching. Their buckle is also very nice. This is a unique buckle. It's not an out of the off-the-shelf buckle. Has some nice machining to it, a nice style, fair logo in there. The buckle tang itself is also solid rather than folded, which is a nice and sometimes uncommon detail. But yeah, I imagine you could go with almost any different strap type with this. So when you buy the watch, probably the Milanese adds a little bit of cost to it, but the other leathers, you just get a lot of different options there. To wrap up, the Ferro Universal Barnato, I think, is a really well-executed watch. It's nicely designed, it's interesting, has a lot of style, has a unique aesthetic that pulls on vintage, but feels modern, it feels fresh and contemporary, and it feels fashionable in a way I think a lot of other watches in this kind of aesthetic don't necessarily always feel. And the brand itself, Fair, I mean, I think, this is one of their first watches, and I think that just says a lot. This is a brand with obviously some really bold ideas behind it. And you take a look at their branding, you take a look at their website, it's much more polished than a lot of other brands you see. This is not kind of a shot in the dark brand that's going to be gone in a couple of weeks or a couple of years, as it might be. I think they're here to stay. I think they're doing something really interesting, and I know that in the next, several months, they're going to be coming out with stuff that's going to be very appealing to everybody. This watch, obviously, I think the design really works. I like the functionality. The drawback is that it is a quartz watch, and it is a bit expensive for a quartz watch. $440, just to be blunt, I wouldn't run to buying a quartz watch. If this was an automatic, even if it was a three-hand automatic with the same styling, at that price, I would absolutely love to get it. I think it would be a fantastic piece. As it is, it's just a bit pricey, and obviously there's a lot of competition at that price point. That's not news. That's something I'm sure the brand is very aware of. That said, I think their execution and the design that is in this speaks to the quality and speaks to that there is a lot more going on here. So for the right customer, I don't think this price is outrageous. Certainly, it's not an obscene price. It's not like $1,000. There's a lot more expensive quartz watches out there from Swiss brands that don't have nearly this much aesthetic styling or really conceptual, acumen going on. So this is definitely a watch worth taking a look at if you're looking for something vintage and stylish. Definitely a brand, absolutely a brand worth taking a closer look at and keeping an eye on. Please read the full review at Worn&Wound. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you.